France issued a threat. Burkina Faso ignored it, and the world had no answer. While every Western power was busy writing warnings, a 34-year-old military captain was already signing deals with one of the most sanctioned nations on earth, North Korea. Not in secret, openly, defiantly, trading African land and resources for weapons and elite military training, right under France's nose. Paris claimed ownership of that land. Traoré said, "We don't care." No Western coalition stopped it. No sanction reversed it. So ask yourself, if a broke, landlocked Sahel country just outmaneuvered France, NATO, and the UN simultaneously, what does that tell you about who actually controls Africa right now? In the middle of West Africa, a landlocked country that most of the world barely notices has just signed a deal that could unsettle the entire post-Cold War order on the continent. Burkina Faso, a nation the size of Colorado, racked by a jihadist insurgency that has displaced millions, has entered into a military and resource partnership with North Korea. Not a tentative diplomatic handshake, not a vague memorandum of understanding quietly buried in bureaucratic language. A full agreement. Vast tracts of farmland and natural resources flowing east to Pyongyang, in exchange for millions of dollars in military hardware and elite combat training flowing west to Ouagadougou. And France, the former colonial power that still considers much of this territory within its strategic orbit, has already issued its warnings. Ibrahim Traoré's government has looked Paris in the eye and told it, in every diplomatic way possible, to step aside. This is where the story starts. Not in history textbooks, not in colonial archives. Right here, right now, in a calculated act of sovereign defiance that is forcing the entire world to ask a question it has avoided for decades. What happens when Africa stops asking for permission? To understand how we arrived at this moment, you need to understand who Ibrahim Traoré is, and more importantly, what he represents. Traoré is not a democratically elected president in the conventional sense. He came to power in September 2022 through Burkina Faso's second coup that year, seizing control of a country already traumatized by political instability and a jihadist insurgency that had spiraled beyond the capacity of the preceding government to contain. He was 34 years old when he took power, making him the youngest sitting head of state in the world at the time. A military captain by rank, a Pan-Africanist in ideology, and a student of a very specific tradition. The legacy of Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's revolutionary leader who was assassinated in 1987 and who remains, to this day, one of the most mythologized political figures in African history. Sankara rejected Western aid, expelled foreign military advisors, renounced IMF debt, and spoke in terms that were decades ahead of their moment about African self-determination, ecological sustainability, and the spiritual violence of dependency. He was killed, many believe with French complicity, after just 4 years in power. Traoré has made no secret of his reverence for that legacy. And since assuming control, he has moved with remarkable speed and ideological consistency to operationalize it. He expelled French military forces. He ended the Operation Barkhane partnership. He removed French ambassador Luc Holliday, giving him 48 hours to leave the country. He suspended French-aligned media operations. He has publicly aligned himself with Mali and Niger, both of whom have also expelled French forces and formed what is now being called the Alliance of Sahel States. And now he has signed a deal with North Korea. Each of these moves on its own could be dismissed as posturing. Together, they form a coherent, deliberate geopolitical pivot whose implications reach far beyond the Sahel. Let's be specific about what this deal actually entails, because the details matter. According to the information that has emerged, the agreement between Burkina Faso and North Korea centers on two primary exchanges. On one side, agricultural land and access to natural resources. Burkina Faso has significant mineral wealth, gold, manganese, zinc, limestone, and its agricultural land, while challenged by climate pressures and desertification, remains a strategic asset in a world increasingly anxious about food security. North Korea, meanwhile, is a nation under one of the most comprehensive sanctions regimes in modern history. Its economy is strangled. Its agriculture has suffered repeated crises. Its ability to generate hard currency is severely constrained. Access to land, minerals, and resources in a friendly African state offers Pyongyang something genuinely valuable, a workaround. A quiet lane around the sanctions wall that the United States and its allies have spent decades constructing. On the other side of the exchange, military equipment and elite training. The specifics here are harder to verify in full detail, but the framework is clear. Burkina Faso receives arms and the kind of specialized military knowledge that North Korea has developed through decades of operating as a militarized state under siege. Whether that includes special forces training, weapon systems, counterinsurgency doctrine, or some combination, the core logic is identical. Traoré gets security capacity without strings attached, and North Korea gets economic relief without surrendering any strategic leverage. This is the deal France says it cannot accept. The French objection centers on a specific and pointed claim that some of the land involved in this agreement was acquired by French interests in 2018. Paris is asserting, in other words, that Burkina Faso is handing over land that it doesn't fully own, or that at minimum is subject to existing legal arrangements with French entities. Traoré's government has dismissed this claim entirely. The official Burkinabe position is straightforward. This is sovereign territory, administered by a sovereign government, and no former colonial power has the standing to dictate how it is managed, allocated, or leveraged in international agreements. Here is where the tension becomes structural rather than merely diplomatic. The French argument, even if legally coherent in narrow technical terms, runs into a larger problem. It asks a post-colonial African government to subordinate its sovereign decision-making to the property claims of a country that held it as a colony less than 70 years ago. Whatever the legal merits, the political optics of that argument, in 2025, in the Sahel, amid a Pan-Africanist revival that is reshaping the continent's political culture, are simply catastrophic for France. Every time Paris insists on those claims, it reinforces exactly the narrative that Traoré and figures like him have been building their entire political project around. And France knows this, which is why the response from Paris has been measured. Threatening in tone, but cautious in action. There are no French boots on the ground in Burkina Faso available to enforce anything. The military relationships that once gave France operational leverage in the region have been methodically dismantled. What remains is diplomatic pressure, economic leverage through institutions where France holds influence, and the looming but uncertain threat of international legal proceedings. None of these are fast. None of them are guaranteed to work, and all of them by time that Traoré is actively using. The question you should be sitting with right now is this: is France's objection really about land acquired in 2018, or is it about something much larger? Because the honest answer to anyone tracking the strategic picture is that the land dispute is a pressure point, not the underlying concern. What France is watching with growing alarm is the systematic construction of a new security architecture in the Sahel that excludes it entirely. For decades, the French military presence in West and Central Africa served multiple functions simultaneously. Counterterrorism, yes, but also political stabilization on French terms, protection of French corporate and resource interests, and the maintenance of CFA franc monetary arrangements that kept French banks and businesses embedded in the region's economic flows. That entire system is now being dismantled piece by piece, with the alliance of Sahel states serving as both the institutional vehicle and the ideological banner. The North Korea deal accelerates that process in a specific way. By bringing Pyongyang into the security equation, Traoré is not just diversifying his military supply chain. He is introducing a partner that is structurally immune to Western pressure. North Korea operates entirely outside the Western-led international order. It has survived decades of isolation, sanctions, and coercive diplomacy. It does not depend on Western financial institutions, does not seek Western diplomatic recognition in any meaningful way, and has developed a kind of institutional resilience to external pressure that most nations simply do not possess. When Burkina Faso partners with North Korea, it is, in part, importing that resilience, signaling to France, to the United States, and to international bodies that the threat of isolation or sanction has a diminishing deterrent effect on a government that is actively choosing alternative partnerships. This is not an accident. This is the strategy. It is worth pausing here to consider the broader regional pattern, because Burkina Faso is not operating in isolation. To the west, Mali's military government, also part of the alliance of Sahel states, has deepened its partnership with Russia's Wagner Group, now rebranded as the Africa Corps. Wagner fighters have been operating in Mali for several years, providing security services in exchange for access to gold mines and other resources. The parallels with the Burkina-North Korea arrangement are almost architectural. Sovereignty traded for security, resources traded for military capacity, Western partnerships dissolved in favor of relationships with powers that ask fewer political questions. To the east, Niger has followed a strikingly similar trajectory. After its own coup in July 2023, it expelled American forces from the Agadez drone base, one of the most strategically significant American military installations in Africa, serving as the backbone of U.S. drone surveillance and counterterrorism operations across the Sahel. That base is now gone. The Americans are out. And Niger, like its alliance partners, has pivoted toward Russia and other non-Western actors. What is happening in the Sahel is not three separate coups with three separate causes. It is a regional realignment, a collective, if loosely coordinated, rejection of the post-colonial security framework that France and its Western allies spent decades constructing. And it is happening fast, faster than Western governments anticipated, faster than their diplomatic institutions can respond to. The policy debates in Paris and Washington are still catching up to decisions that have already been made on the ground. For Traoré personally, the North Korea deal represents something beyond pure strategic calculation. It is a statement of intent, a signal to his domestic constituency, to the Pan-Africanist diaspora watching from around the world, and to other African leaders considering similar pivots that Burkina Faso is serious, that the threats did not work, that the warnings from Paris landed and were evaluated and then deliberately set aside. There is a domestic political logic here as well. In a country where anti-French sentiment runs extremely high, particularly among younger populations, the ability to say that your government stood up to France and did not blink carries enormous political capital. Traoré understands this. The deal is a foreign policy move and a domestic political consolidation at the same time. What does North Korea actually gain from this arrangement? It is worth thinking carefully about Pyongyang's calculus, because North Korea does not make these moves without strategic purpose. The obvious gain is economic, land, resources, and hard currency flowing into a sanction-strangled economy. But the strategic gain may be even more significant. By establishing a substantive partnership with an African government, North Korea is demonstrating that its isolation is not complete, that there are sovereign states willing to do business with it on mutually beneficial terms, regardless of what Washington or Seoul or Tokyo demand. Every successful partnership of this kind is a data point in Pyongyang's ongoing effort to prove that the sanctions regime is porous, that the Western-led international order cannot achieve total diplomatic encirclement, and that North Korea remains a viable actor capable of projecting influence beyond its immediate region. There is also a precedent dimension. If the Burkina Faso deal holds, if it proceeds without triggering consequences that deter other potential African partners, then it becomes a template. Other Sahel governments or governments elsewhere in Africa facing similar pressures might look at this arrangement and see a viable model. Security capacity from a sanctions-resistant partner in exchange for resources, without the political conditionalities that Western partners attach to their aid. That is a genuinely disruptive possibility, and it is one that Western foreign policy establishments are only beginning to fully reckon with. The sanctions question deserves specific attention. The arrangement between Burkina Faso and North Korea is not simply a bilateral deal between two governments. It is, in several dimensions, a challenge to the architecture of international sanctions as a coercive instrument. United Nations Security Council resolutions have placed severe restrictions on North Korea's weapons exports, military partnerships, and ability to generate foreign revenue. If Burkina Faso proceeds with this deal, receiving military equipment and training from North Korea, it would be operating in direct tension with those resolutions. The question is, what happens then? Does the UN Security Council move to sanction Burkina Faso? Does it attempt to enforce existing North Korea sanctions against an African government? The practical and political difficulties of doing so are enormous. Russia and China, both permanent Security Council members with veto power, have shown diminishing appetite for aggressive sanctions enforcement in the current geopolitical climate. France and the United States would find it extremely difficult to assemble the political consensus needed for meaningful punitive action. This is precisely the kind of enforcement gap that Traoré's government appears to have calculated. The rules exist on paper. The mechanisms for enforcement are politically paralyzed. The consequences are uncertain. And in that space of uncertainty, a determined government can move. There are, of course, risks, significant ones. Burkina Faso is not in a stable position. The jihadist insurgency, driven primarily by groups affiliated with both Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, has not been defeated. It has, in many areas, expanded. Millions of people remain internally displaced. Agricultural production has been disrupted. Humanitarian conditions in parts of the country are severe. The security logic of the North Korea deal assumes that military equipment and training will meaningfully change the trajectory of the counterinsurgency campaign. That is not guaranteed. North Korea's military doctrine was developed for very different threat environments, conventional state-on-state conflict, not the kind of distributed, ideologically motivated insurgency that has been tearing through the Sahel for more than a decade. Whether Pyongyang's expertise translates effectively to Burkina Faso's battlefield is a genuine open question. There is also the question of what happens to civilian populations when military arrangements of this kind are pursued without robust governance frameworks. Human rights organizations have already documented serious concerns about the conduct of Burkina Faso's military forces, the Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland, known as the VDP, in counterinsurgency operations. Additional military capacity and external training, without accountability mechanisms, carries real risks of escalation in civilian harm. This is not a hypothetical concern. It is a documented pattern across multiple Sahel countries where security force expansion has outpaced institutional oversight. And yet, and this is the uncomfortable part of the analysis, the Western alternative that is being implicitly contrasted with the North Korea deal has its own profound failures on the record. Operation Barkhane, the French counterterrorism mission that operated in the Sahel for nearly a decade, did not defeat the insurgency. The United States' significant investment in training and equipping Sahelian militaries, including the forces that eventually carried out coups in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, did not produce the governance outcomes Washington hoped for. The argument that Western security partnerships lead to better humanitarian outcomes, while North Korean or Russian partnerships lead to worse ones, is an argument that requires a great deal of selectivity about which evidence you choose to look at. The geopolitical stakes of this standoff extend beyond West Africa. They connect to a larger contest about the rules and norms that govern international relations, about whether the Western-led order, with its sanctions regimes, conditionality frameworks, and security alliances, retains its authority and enforcement capacity across the global South. For the better part of 3 decades after the Cold War, the answer to that question was largely yes. The alternatives, Russia, China, and now an increasingly assertive group of middle powers, were not sufficiently developed or coordinated to offer a genuine parallel track. That era is ending. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the accumulation of decisions exactly like this one. A small, landlocked, impoverished country deciding that the cost of Western alignment has become higher than the cost of seeking alternatives. France's position in Africa is at an inflection point that its political class has been slow to honestly confront. The post-colonial arrangement, military bases, CFA franc, resource concessions, preferred diplomatic relationships, was always premised on a certain asymmetry of power and a certain degree of African elite buy-in. That buy-in is eroding rapidly. The generation of African leaders that came of age within the Francophone system is being replaced, through coups and elections both, by leaders who grew up watching that system fail to deliver security, development, or dignity. Traoré is the clearest current example of that generational shift. He is not aberrant. He is a signal. What happens next matters enormously, not just for Burkina Faso, but for the entire regional architecture. If France escalates its response through economic sanctions, legal proceedings, or coordinated pressure through international institutions, and that pressure fails to deter or reverse the North Korea deal, it will have demonstrated the limits of its coercive capacity in a way that every other African government is watching. If France does not escalate and the deal proceeds, it will have demonstrated the same thing through inaction. There is no outcome in which Paris recovers its former leverage in the Sahel quickly or easily. That leverage was built over decades and is being dismantled at a pace that suggests it was always more fragile than it appeared. For North Korea, the success or failure of this partnership will be read as a test of its ability to project influence and build durable relationships beyond its immediate neighborhood. A successful deal, one that delivers on its promises for both sides and weathers Western pressure, opens doors that Pyongyang has spent years looking for. The potential for similar arrangements with other resource-rich, security-challenged states in Africa or elsewhere is not trivial. For the United States, the North Korea dimension of this story activates a set of sanctions enforcement obligations and strategic anxieties that go beyond the Sahel itself. Washington's North Korea policy is premised in part on maintaining a comprehensive pressure campaign that leaves Pyongyang without viable economic and military partnerships. Each exception to that campaign, each successful end run around the sanctions wall, weakens the deterrence architecture and creates political complications at home and with allies in East Asia. How the Biden or subsequent American administration responds to the Burkina-North Korea deal will be watched carefully in Seoul, Tokyo, and Taipei, not just in Ouagadougou. And for the African continent more broadly, the moment carries a symbolic weight that transcends the specific terms of any single agreement. The image of an African leader, young, ideologically committed, under pressure from a nuclear-armed former colonial power, proceeding with a sovereign decision despite explicit warnings, is a powerful one. It will be read by many as a proof of concept, not because everyone agrees with Traoré's politics or his methods, not because North Korea is a model partner or a democracy, but because the act of refusing to be deterred, of absorbing the pressure and moving forward anyway, speaks to a political hunger for agency that runs very deep across the continent. Ibrahim Traoré may not survive in power. The Sahel has a pattern of rapid political change, and the same forces that brought him to power could move against him. The North Korea deal may encounter implementation problems. The insurgency may worsen despite the new military capacity. France and its allies may find mechanisms of pressure that have more bite than those deployed so far. All of this is possible, but the underlying dynamic, the demand for sovereign decision-making, the search for partnerships without post-colonial conditionality, the willingness to absorb international pressure in pursuit of a different kind of independence, that is not going away with any one leader or any one deal. It is structural, it is generational, and it is reshaping the continent. The deal France couldn't stop is not just a transaction between Ouagadougou and Pyongyang. It is a symptom of a deeper fracture in the global order, a fracture that is widening, and that no single diplomatic intervention, legal claim, or military threat is likely to close. What Burkina Faso does next, and how the world responds, will tell us a great deal about what kind of international system we are actually building, as opposed to the one we have always assumed was already in place. That question does not have an answer yet, but it is being written, right now, in the red dust of the Sahel.